Kali Tribune podcast. We'll start this podcast with a question and the example of situation in which this question arises. Think about if you ever found yourself in a situation when you remember or recall some idea you had, let's say 10 or even 20 years ago, especially if you have had written down that idea. So for instance, situation would be you find a kind of essay, article, diary entry, anything put in writing by your older self, that is to say your younger self, which is interesting paradox. Maybe we'll get back to it. And you read that thing, and perhaps you have two of following impressions, that is to say either one of them or both of them. First would be that you don't understand anything of what you thought at the time. It seems completely as thoughts of another man or woman. Or you have an idea, you have an impression that something that is said there is pretty smart. You understand it, it seems very intelligent, but you don't understand how come you knew that, because now when you're reading it, you are learning it anew. You learned something new from your younger, that is to say in other sequence of time, older self, of your original self. Now this is nothing peculiar to happen to one, especially if you are a student or a student that continued after he graduated, continued to work in this academic professions, or anyway continued writing and thinking and so on and so forth. It's something that you are bound to encounter and I believe reflect upon. Now what we are dealing with here, as we always do here on Kali Tribune, this is a springboard for a higher metaphysical, let's call it, question. Everyday example. Because we don't do thought experiments, that is to say imagination experiments, as is very popular in modern philosophy. We don't need to, because life makes its experiments for us. We just try to interpret them. And life experiments are not experiments in modern sense because they don't occur in controlled environment, as well as this podcast is not played out in controlled environment. We have a free flow of the thought. So, how can knowledge be forgotten? And is all knowledge forgotten? Now, the first answer, common sense, as it were, answer would be that simply passage of time erases impressions, organic impressions. And not only that, if it doesn't really erase them, or they just get buried beneath others, and well, you just forget because you use your brain and so on and so forth. This is partly true. What it doesn't suffice to explain is, however, that some things are not forgotten. And this is something I noticed rather early, because this process of forgetting yourself and is parallel with the process realization of your own mortality, which in normal circumstances I think do not occur to a normal human being before 25 years of age. Before that you are immortal. Even if you got yourself in a life-threatening situations, this youth has this sense of immortality, of living forever, of ability to go everywhere, try everything, and blah 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 blah. And this changes. And in my experience, it coincided with starting first experience of forgetting some things that I invested a whole lot of energy into learning. But I have to correct myself now, because there are things that do not get forgotten. And a concrete example of philosophy, I realized after a long time that those are answers to questions. I could never forget, for myself, for instance, take myself as an example, could never forget some Aristotle's, for instance, conclusions, inferences, and so on. You simply cannot forget them. The reason why you cannot forget them is, and this is very important, you assimilated them. Your mind, in a way, was informed by them. And this, my friends, you won't forget. Now, why this happens? Why we could call them accidental things, or accidental knowledge does not get forgotten? Although I should point out, it's very interesting how man remembers some trivial things, also complete trivia, and never forgets it. I wonder why is that? One answer would be, it's not the subject here, I'll just put it as a footnote to this podcast. One answer would be that what seems to us accidental, from our own realization of reality, might not be so accidental in itself. Something completely random is maybe not an accident. So let's leave it at that. So how come we forget and something we remember? My answer would be that these things that inform us, that our mind assimilates, are what one could call acts of mind, in which mind makes itself actual, energizes itself, one could say. And the more the energy it produces, it kind of like puts itself into motion, the more real the knowledge is. If knowledge is merely an imprint where mind haven't done any activity, and mind doing activity, let us remember, is man doing activity, because mind is completely personal faculty of a man, or of a living soul and body, and it cannot really. It implies deliberation. So there is a moral, even good and bad aspect to cognition, to knowledge, because you have to decide to know. And what we today seem to often forget, there are things that one should decide not to know. That's something not only Christian would tell you, but Aristotle. I get this from his Nicomachean Ethics, when he says there are things that are better not known. This is, so divergent from this contemporary mentality we all participate in to a certain extent, where what can be known must be known. This was not always the case. This is a very important thing. So there has to be a personal effort, a personal action of thinking to have a chance of being retained. And this is very important. And this is very important for understanding of intelligence, because intelligence is an ability or potentiality or power of a certain nature to acquire truth. It is not IQ, therefore. This is what I consider intelligence to be. It is ability to act. And the higher the activity, the more you invest yourself into thinking, acts of thinking, the more intelligent you are. So this is really not something that is quantifiable like IQ, because IQ came into use for quantifying reasons. They needed to quantify intelligence of races to segregate them in Anglo-Saxon world, primarily North America. But that's a question in itself. That's a subject in itself, of course. So this would be, in my opinion, this is a thesis, the ground for not forgetting knowledge. But can we imagine the situation? No, we won't imagine it. Can we have a situation? Can we conceive of possibility of situation where knowledge is not forgotten at all? Well, let me put it this way. Let's think about what it means to sleep. When you sleep, you forget yourself to a certain extent. I think everybody will agree on that. Sleep is the brother of Thanatos. Hypnosis brother to Thanatos. Greek god of death. And it's not for nothing, because sleep is probably most akin to death, and death is usually described as sleep. But you do forget yourself for 10 nights in a row. But 11th night in a row, you can dream of something and have an insight into something that you could never imagine in the waking life. What does this mean? This means that, I tell you exactly what this means, that consciousness is not a substantial mode of our existence. Having or not having consciousness is not primary to anything. In dream, when you have consciousness that you are dreaming, you wake up. Without consciousness that you are dreaming, you don't wake up, and it may be the dream is telling you something very intelligent. And I won't go too deep into that, but let us know that. We all have such experiences. I'm not doing, this is why I don't do thought experiments. These are experiences we cannot explain. There are predictive dreams. Most of people had it. There are dreams when you realize something in it, when it seems that it's warning you about something. There are even stranger things. These things are facts. These are facts that cannot be quantified, so I don't care they cannot be quantified. This only means that they are of higher importance. But, unfortunately, we'll never have higher science to deal with them, because we don't deserve it. But that's also subject in itself. So, we cannot then make our knowledge real. How could we? Because we are able even to forget ourselves. Because if we are to be the principle of reality of something we have, let us remember this, we should have more reality ourselves, but every day we forget we exist. Although we do continue existing. We do continue existing not as bodies that are snoring, but as persons. There is no discontinuation, because if consciousness was all, then every night, every morning you woke up, you would be born again. But dreaming clearly shows you that in dreams, a person retains its memory. Moreover, it can remember things that are completely forgotten on conscious level, and so on. So the existence of person is not the existence of consciousness. It has, in fact, very little to do with one with another. So we would have to be some kind of principle giver of being, because having, in this sense, implies giving. If knowledge would to have absolute, that is to say, pure existence, pure esse, as we would say in Latin, or pure energia in Greek, then the knowledge would have to be not had, but it would only have to be. There would be no discrepancy between being and having. And this is the crux of what we want to say in this podcast. Being is only conferred in an absolute and a pure sense to being that is identical with it. That is to say, to a being that cannot be in any way separated of its isness. Isness is like a verb is. Because isness, put it with big I, would be, I would say, the good translation both of esse and partly qualifiedly energia. Energia is actuality, literally. In actuality would be even better literal translation. To explain what I mean by this, and now of course I'm talking about utter simplicity of God. And being of God is not understood, or knowledge of God or anything like that is not understood in our categories, save in a special methodical way of depicting names of God. That's something that is a subject in itself. Also, I will try to explain what I think in pictures, because these problems, like this, not problem, the principles like this are usually explained in a very abstract manner. I give you more pictorial depiction. I had a few videos about Nicholas of Cusa, the Visione Dei. Just shortly to reiterate what I said here, it's a book that he sent to monks at Tegernsee Monastery in Germany with an icon. And by the way, I said in those videos that it was not an icon but the self-portrait of one Dutch painter. But as I understand by the new research, according to new research, it is actually a Byzantine icon he brought from Constantinople. And he tells them that they should circle all in group, circle in different direction around this image. An image had, as icons have this fixed gaze, images, everybody has an impression that the gaze of icon is following him and only him. And now Nicholas leads them into exercise in mystical theology and negative theology. This is an important thing. At one point he says the gaze of God, the vision of God, that is to say, if God is the subject of this sentence, his vision that belongs to him, is at the same time hearing of God, and now I'm paraphrasing, being of God, and this is important, bestowing of being to others. This is what we understand by the term this oneness or simplicity of God. And that all of those qualities, what we see as modes, are one in him. This does not mean that there is a one, that they are not differentiated. It just means that they are one. When you have one, you have the other. They are convertible, let's say. But that's also subject in itself to go further. What I want to say is that in Nicholas, you have in this exercise, you have few people who are telling each other completely contradictory things. So one monk says, the gaze was following me, I was going east. The other would say, no, at the same time I was going west and it was following me. So what you have here is a symbolic depiction of God's vision. And this vision is, for our human standards, contradictory, can be understood only as contradictory in a human sense because it is coincidentia oppositorum. It is beyond opposites. It can be east, it can be west at the same instant. And this is this oneness. And therefore, for God to see means for God to create at the same instance. And we always get into problems when people try to interpret this, to apply it to something, to some other less divine issues, because the true meaning can get lost. This is not reduction to concepts, because neither is God concept, neither is being that is bestowed or given or can be had a concept. It is reality, an act, an energia. Only there is inference here of purity of energia that makes all things in it one. And this energia has to be understood not as a monad. By monad I think this like intellectual atom to which everything can be reduced. No, it has to be understood as diffusive, as energia or reality is. The very word has this fluidity to it, and it implies life. For instance, in Aristotle, and this is something that is proven even in scholarship, that Aristotle's term energia, his understanding of energia, is the closest in the West to biblical understanding of being, of reality as it is understood in Old Testament, because energia implies in Aristotle, especially, it implies life. When you read his physics, one thing you notice is that for all his investigation into notions of nature in general, you really have a feeling that he confers life on nature, or at least that everything that is in movement in nature is somehow imitating life, living things. Living things are living is for him a primary thing, from which it's kind of completely conflated with the idea of reality, is idea of life. In this terminology, that's why I think it really gives you a good impression on your mind when you say energia. So it is diffusive. It is diffusive of itself, and being eternal. That is to say, being not contracted to something particular. It is ever present. So it is to be understood to be everywhere. So the act of creating or act of giving, which is in fact convertible, giving and creating, is not something that one should understand as it happened sometime immemorial, as not happening now. It is ever present. It's very hard to understand. Of course, we are built to try to understand this, but by ourselves we run into problems. But to cut this short, because we are already going forth too long, let us conclude what this means for our question. So this is this forgetfulness we experience, and this ability to recall we experience is something that tells us a lot about our relationship to what is higher of us, ultimately our relationship to God, because it displays our finitude in this, because forgetfulness is the lack of power. And being created does not mean merely being material. It means that your power has a limit. For instance, in angels, the idea is that angels last forever, but they are not eternal in the sense that God is eternal. Why? Because their capacity for good is limited, while the God's, who is good, is so unlimited that it is diffusive to all. So finitude of angel would be pure finitude of power, not finitude of merely time. as it is in humans. But humans also have these limits of power. But also there are, I think I have shown, at least in this non-metaphysical, non-theological part of the podcast, dealing with IQ, to be more precise, excuse me, that there is that thinking is higher power than merely material, dealing with how shall I even put it, getting these material impressions and having your physical brain capable of combining them quickly, or often in a spatial sense, because IQ tests, at least now, IQ tests I had before me, are mostly tests of making spatial combinations of things and recognizing patterns. And intelligence, of which I was talking about, this is traditional notion of intelligence, is something different and something quite more powerful, I think. But not so powerful that we can have it all the way as we perhaps want. So that was that was being intelligence, let's call it, podcast. Thank you for your attention. This is Branko Malic of Kali Tribune signing out.